world. I am Aaron Freeman. That there beautiful smiling face is the one and only Professor Peggy Mason, Professor of Neurobiology at the University of Chicago. Collectively, we are the Chicago Brain Buddies. We believe that to study the brain is to better understand human behavior, and understanding behavior makes it easier to forgive people, and that makes it easier to be happy. Hi, Peggy.
Hi there. Let's talk about something unhappy.
Well, yes, but wait, let's talk about something that we shouldn't be talking about. Because I took understanding the brain and the neurobiology of everyday life. And I know that there should not be such a thing as a headache because brains do not feel pain. You can mush around there. They don't hurt. There's no nociceptors.
There are no nociceptors in the brain. That is true.
So this is a mistake.
Okay, so Aaron, how do you feel pain?
Well, you feel pain when your afferent nociceptors send signals from wherever in the body there's a disruption, and it goes into your little brain, and you perceive it.
So, okay. Are the afferents enough?
You're going to say that you have to have a brain in order to receive the afferent signal.
I am.
Wow.
And what is the proof of that pudding?
I don't know. What is the proof of that pudding?
The proof of that pudding is amputation pain.
A phantom limb. So that you can
it's that you don't have the limb anymore. There are no afferents. But the pain is up here. It's in the brain. The pain perception is in the brain. It can be independent of any input from the periphery, noxious input, true information. The experience is up here. I've just been reading a unbelievably devastating book or a story called, the book is called Radium Girls. And it's about the dial painters from the 20s and 30s. And
dial painters? I don't know what a dial painter is.
So they paint the dials with radium to make the dials glow in the dark.
Oh, I remember this.
And so they have to paint it onto very thin dials. So to do that, they take the brush, lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. So they're constantly getting radium into their mouths. They get these alpha radioactive waves that are just in the gums, and the gums disintegrate. I mean, it's just a hideous, hideous story. But they also get these sarcomas. So one of the things that happens with radium poisoning is that they get a sarcoma. So this woman gets a sarcoma in the bend of her neck, of her arm. And it's little, but they grow rapidly. And eventually the physicians say, you got to cut it off or else it's going to kill you. And so it's extremely painful. So they cut it off. And what happens? She's got no more arm. Does she have pain?
Yes.
The same freaking pain as before. It's a horrible, horrible story. And I just read that this morning. I was just like, oh my God. That's the real power of the brain to create the experience of pain. The pain does not exist anywhere. It doesn't exist in the arm. Doesn't exist out in the world. It doesn't exist anywhere, but it is perceived using your brain.
All right, now, but we're going to talk about specifically some really good news. Enough of this really depressing stuff, okay? We're going to talk about something really good because there's a brand new treatment for migraine headaches. But migraine headaches is not exactly the most accurate way to describe the condition being treated.
Why not?
Oh, because migraines are not merely, and the pain of migraine is not merely in your head.
Right. So in fact, it is not a headache. It is it would be more accurately described as a meningiache.
What is a meningiache?
Meningiache. So meninges are the membranes that cover the brain, and while the brain has no sensitivity, it has no nerve fibers that can sense noxious stimulation. The meninges do. So these coverings are very sensitive to little perturbations, and they send signals into the central nervous system that are perceived as pain.
So now just briefly, there are 3 layers of meninges.
Right.
All of them nociceptive. Can any one of them hurt?
Probably mostly the pia and the dura.
Okay.
So there's the pia, the arachnoid, and the dura. It's probably the pia and the dura, the innermost and the outermost, that are most sensitive.
So when we're talking pain in the head as related to migraine, we're talking about pain in the dura. And there are 2 hypotheses for how that pain is generated.
There are 2 hypotheses for what is going on in migraine. So first of all, what's the difference between migraine and a headache? So as many of you may know, migraine is something that is accompanied by nausea. A lot of people, they'll block off the window because they don't like the light. That's called photophobia. They're phobic about the light. The light is uncomfortable to them. They're inactive. They go to sleep. And, one of the open questions is, if you get the nausea and the photophobia, but you don't, and you want to go to bed, is that a migraine? Even if you don't have a splitting headache.
Right.
And that's one of the interesting questions. My hunch is yes, that is a migraine. That the headache is a common symptom, but not a required symptom.
Okay.
So in 1948, Wolf proposed that migraines stem from vasodilation, that the cerebral blood vessels were being stretched, and that was what caused the pain eventually. That has been attacked sort of steadily for a lot of reasons, such as, if you look at the period, migraine is a hours long event. It takes a while. And the period that is associated with pain, sometimes blood flow is either normal or even lower, suggesting that the blood vessels may be constricted. Another piece of evidence against the idea of vasodilation being a critical factor is that you can cause vasodilation and not cause a migraine. Okay. So there are some substances that will dilate the vessels, but will not cause a migraine. And there are also substances that will cause migraine without vasodilating. So you can have all these dissociations. So the other alternative is that it's a problem with the neurons, the nerves that pick up the signal and send that signal back into the nervous system. So these are the afferents, the sensory nerves. So those sensory nerves are responding to stuff that they shouldn't respond to.
So I think so. The two of the theories are: one, vasodilation, that the veins are being pushed out for whatever reason, pushed too far out, and that stretching is causing pain. And the other is that there's some sort of neurological problem. So because there's a neuroinflammatory response, is what some people say, right?
Right. So that the neurons get active. They release substances at their ends. We don't really think about sensory neurons that are sending information into the central nervous system. Well, it turns out that they also can carry action potentials in the other direction, and they can release substances at the end. And this typically is thought to have beneficial effects, but it can also have detrimental effects, as some would argue it does in migraine. So the idea is that you have a neurogenic event. It starts with the nerves. It doesn't start with the vessels and then go to the nerves. It starts with the nerves. And then one consequence of that, a common consequence, but not a required consequence, is that the blood vessels vasodilate. So this is essentially, here's a analogy. Every time you see a bad car crash, you see an ambulance. Okay?
Right.
Every time so one could say, if you always see them together, well, maybe that ambulance caused the car crash.
Okay.
But of course, what we know is that the ambulance comes because the car crash happened. Right. And so that's the analogy, that in fact what we're seeing is what people would call an epiphenomenon. Yes, it happens, but no, it's not causally related.
Got it. So now this brand new drug called
Aimovig.
Aimovig. So Aimovig works in a novel way involving
CGRP. CGRP is one of these substances, one of the peptides that's contained in the sensory nerve fibers.
CGRP stands for?
What's that?
CGRP stands for?
Calcitonin gene-related peptide.
Calcitonin gene-related peptide, okay.
And it's a pretty famous peptide because it's very important out in the periphery, along with another peptide, substance P. So substance P and CGRP, they set up this cascade of bad events out in the periphery that swell the tissue, cause the blood vessels to dilate and to get leaky. So stuff comes out of the blood vessels, stuff such as bradykinin and serotonin. These are nasty chemicals that are going to make you hurt. And then it also degranulates mast cells. So then the mast cells start pouring out histamine and protons. And you've got this big soup of nasty chemicals that are just making that tissue very, very responsive and unhappy.
But CPRG does not cause, so people who have migraines have a tendency to produce more CPRG than those.
CGRP, yeah.
CGRP. And so, but an abundance of CGRP does not necessarily cause migraines.
Correct.
So there's a balance in there about being sensitive to it. Or tell me more about it.
So I mean, the thing is that the drugs that have been used. So let's say the ergotamines. Ergotamines have been used for a long, long time in the treatment of migraine with some effect.
I don't know what an ergotamine is.
It's a substance that's derived from a family of fungus.
Okay.
So, it's an alkaloid, and it's very effective.
Okay. In treating migraine.
Or it was the standard of migraine treatment for a long, long time.
And did it cause, my understanding is that the problem with some of the earlier migraine treatments was that they were not well tolerated, liver troubles. Is that true?
Because what happens is that the old ones were aimed at the vascular system. So they tried to constrict the blood vessels.
Believing that
the vasodilation was the problem. So they tried to constrict the blood vessels. What happens if you constrict the blood vessels?
Your body gets less blood?
No.
Oh.
You have a same volume.
Yes, but if you constrict blood vessels, your heart has to pump harder. Your pumps harder to push the same amount of blood through smaller tubes.
So smaller tubes, same volume means pressure goes up.
Right.
We don't really like hypertension. It's not really something we're really excited about.
Okay.
So that's been a scourge of these migraine treatments, is that they cause hypertension acutely or chronically, and that they, for example, one of the big problems that people are afraid of is these treatments during pregnancy when you have a chance also for developing preeclampsia. Right.
Aimovig does not attempt to reduce dilation.
No, it's a CGRP receptor antagonist. So it's trying to
a CPRG, a receptor antagonist. What is that? Those are
so CGRP is this peptide that's being pumped out too much.
Okay.
But if it was just being pumped out and that's all that happened, who cares? The only reason we care is because this peptide meets this receptor. Mm-hmm. And we want to say no. So we're going to put something in between there. We're going to stop it. We're going to put a blockade, and that's what a receptor antagonist is.
And usually it's an antibody, right? And that is not normal.
This one. It's not always an antibody, but in this case, it's a monoclonal antibody. Yeah.
And that's a relatively novel approach to treating migraine. Yeah,
it is. The CGRP, the drugs that act on CGRP are the newest excitement, shall we say.
But now as wonderful as this is, as I understand it, this can reduce for people who have chronic migraines, as in more than 15 per month.
I think it's more than 4. They had to have more than 4 a month to qualify in the study.
So this can reduce the number of migraines by 50% in 50% of the patients, which is not mass. But I suppose if you are one of those people having 15, 20 a month, or even 4 a month, having half the
and presumably you're using it on patients that are not responding to the cheaper drugs.
Now, speaking of which, this drug costs something like $6,500 a year, maybe $69,000 it could be, but between $6,000 and $7,000, which I guess doesn't seem to me in the world of drugs all that massively expensive. I'm just curious about how you think about that. Right? It doesn't seem all that massively expensive, but I mean,
that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. I don't know how much of it's reimbursed. Those kinds of things I don't know about. I kind of think that it's also notable that these studies are done by people that are contracted by the companies.
Okay.
So
let me give you $1 million. Tell me if this works. Tell me if this drug that I made works is good. But one of the other things I thought of, my understanding is that it is not known exactly how these, why this all works, why blocking the CPRG receptors works.
Well, so the argument is that it works because these nociceptors, these sensory nerve fibers, and it should be said that within the cranium, you don't have nerve fibers that are hooked up to central neurons that will say, oh, you just tickled my skull, or you just blew on my pia, or that you just cooled or warmed my dura. No, you get one output. Whatever you put into it, the output is stop it. And so these fibers, they're called nociceptors. They respond to things that shouldn't be there, injurious things. I mean, some of it is just a tickle, but you shouldn't be tickling inside of somebody's skull. Okay, so anything that it responds to is almost by definition injurious. And what happens in migraine, what appears to happen in migraine, is that the sensitivity of these sensory neurons is increased. So now instead of taking, I have to push like this to get it to be activated. Now all I have to do is this. And so I guess you didn't see that. So instead of pushing down far, you just have to push a little bit. And so one of the things that Rami Burstein did this a while ago, he showed that if you put inflammatory soup on on a dura, that the sensory nerve fibers will now respond to the mechanical stimulation that's produced by the pulse in the blood vessels.
Really?
The blood vessels are doing this, right, with every heartbeat.
Right.
And that in a migrainous rat, that is now enough to excite the nociceptors. So you can imagine how that feels.
So are we certain that we actually know? Let me just say, we have the Chicago Brain Buddies, Aaron Freeman, Professor Peggy Mason, and the goal here is to be able to ask Professor Mason about this particular drug and the mechanisms by which migraines occur and the mechanisms by which brain pain is experienced. So we would love to get your questions or comments. Here, you got her right there. She's waiting. Look at her. She's baiting at the breath. Chomping at the bit is what I meant to say. Chomping at the bit, baiting at the breath for your questions. Please leave them right here below. But so is it your understanding that it is clearly understood how the mechanism by which this new drug, what is it again?
Aimovig.
Aimovig, yes, Aimovig. Is it your understanding that it's well understood how this works, the mechanism by which it relieves pain?
So it's blocking these CGRP receptors that are on the neuron, but they're, it is a little bit, there are CGRP receptors on other elements in the area, including blood vessels. So it is a little bit murky, shall we say.
But now there, I must tell you, is one of the things that I find most elevating and hopeful about this whole little business, which is that, like much else in medicine and science, the mere fact that we have a somewhat murky understanding of the specific mechanics doesn't stop us from making things that can do some good.
Well, we're not making anything that's doing good. We are empirically finding that something that is there might do some good.
Well, but if it relieves 50% of the headaches in 50% of the people, I call that good. And just the fact that it's not thoroughly understood.
But they're not no one's making it in the sense that, I get the mechanism so I can design a drug.
That's what I'm saying.
Will do this. I just throw a bunch of drugs. These are drug companies. They're throwing a bunch of drugs at a system and they're seeing what sticks. And then they, as it passes through enough tests, it goes through increasingly more tests that are mandated by the government.
Right. Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think that's really a wonderful thing.
Well, I actually don't like it because it is it's mechanistically blind.
Yes, it's true. But let me say, I'm fond of pointing out that virtually everybody, no physicist I know thinks that the standard model of particle physics is correct. Nobody I know thinks that they can describe more than 5% of the physical universe. Nonetheless, you can launch a rocket ship from Canaveral in January of 2006 and have it land 9 years later within 500 meters of where it should be near Pluto. So
but that's because you totally understand that part of physics.
Exactly right.
We can make a drug, for example, we can make a drug that leads to more dopamine production. And yet we don't know why the dopamine's not being released and why the dopamine cells are dying in Parkinson's. So, and eventually, if you replace or give dopamine therapy, you're going to eventually, typically, that stops working. So you're really left with it's a Band-Aid because you don't know the mechanism. I think that Parkinson's is a really good example because you get the Band-Aid and it will work for 5-10 years, but eventually it tends to stop working. And then you're basically back where you were with even a little bit of more problem because of this long-term treatment, now you have some additional problems.
Well, I think what you're saying is that it bothers you because you really love the mechanism and you want to know how the heck it exactly works.
Well, no, it's not even that, but I do love that. But the thing is that it's a level of explanation. So, oh, Parkinson's is a loss of dopaminergic neurons. Well, why did those dopaminergic neurons up and die? That only gets you so far. It's not satisfying, and in the end, it will not produce lasting lasting efficacious treatment.
Well, yeah, but again, this is an improvement. This particular medicine is an improvement. Like Ruby, it's our dog. So it's an improvement. This particular medicine,
absolutely, absolutely.
And again, even without a thorough understanding, that's what gives me hope. But I do understand, of course. Obviously, we want to get the really figure.
Okay, I just want to share with you now that we're talking about migraine. I'm going to share with you my one exciting event. I'm in my lab. This was about probably 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I look up at the white wall and I see black and white stripes in a basically a quarter of an arc, a quarter of a circle, alternating black and white stripes, and they're going around as though they were going around on a racetrack. And it started little and it went out and out and out and out. It got bigger, 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 bigger. And then it was gone. What was that? Do you know what it was?
Okay. No.
That was an aura.
Oh, really?
That was an aura. And I never had a headache. And I just was so happy because I had an aura and I didn't even have to pay for
it. Okay, then. A non-aura. So there's no explanation for that? That was the one offer. It just happened. It was just good drugs?
No, I was not taking any drugs.
Oh, well, all right.
Just a happenstance, one-off happenstance, yeah.
All right.
But I liked it.
So again, what gives you this gives you hope? What the optimistic part of this particular little endeavor is that, says you?
Well, yeah, there are more arms in the armament against migraine. So that's great because migraine is really an unpleasant experience.
Yeah, and 3 times more prevalent in women than in men. Interesting.
Yes, that's true too.
And we don't even need to go there. But let me just say, this is Peggy Mason, professor of neurobiology at the University of Chicago. You can check out her blog, thebrainissocool.com. You see, we have the little scroll. Can you see that? There's a little scroll there of the URL of The Brain is So Cool. Anyway, I'm learning. And you can check out my vlog, Science Today, on YouTube. So we're here every Thursday. We very much appreciate your watching. We appreciate you watching live. We appreciate you watching the replay. So Peggy, next week, I look forward to seeing you, my dear beloved friend.
Okay. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. Mwah, 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 mwah.